Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I look at the GameDay football sets of the early 90s. GameDay came out of an interesting time in the late 80s when there was a rediscovery of the past. There was a whole growth in the mid 80s where new collectors were coming in and discovering a world that was obviously new as it was emerging with these newer sets that were coming out with Score and Upper Deck. But there was also a discovery of the past which longer term collectors had known about, but for the new market it's discovering this old time from a lost era. Topps had always catered to this, but they began to play around some more with it in the late 80s with Topps Big, and then in 1989 they launched a whole set, a formal set of slightly oversized cards called 1989 Topps Bowman. This was intended to cater to this fascination with these older cards that didn't fit anything from modern eras. They had different sizes, they had very different design approaches. And so 89 Bowman was capturing the old Bowman cards from the 40s and 50s, primarily from the 50s, that the new collectors were really fascinated with, giving them the opportunity to discover cards that in and of themselves were very, very distinctive and special like the old cards. That was the concept they went with, and so they wanted to make a higher end set catering to the market of people looking for the valuable old cards. That was the key. Its success wasn't good enough for them to continue to use the large size, so they went back to a normal size, and Bowman kind of became more of a standard set, but the idea was, it was definitely in place and people knew about it. In 1992, NFL Properties strangely decided to create their own card set, and this was a very unique approach to take because prior to that, NBA Hoops and Pro Set had made deals with the leagues in order to get access to all of their images. But the idea that the league themselves would make a card set, or the wing of the league that handles all of these deals, that was kind of interesting. And so GameDay was their expansion out into the world of cards. And in a way it kind of made sense because GameDay, the name, is the name of the programs that they sell at the stadiums. That was the marketing wing of NFL Properties that was catering to the public. And so as an offshoot of the programs, they decided to make these cards. And the way that they went about making the cards was they wanted to cater to that old classic, the classic feel of old cards. In football, you still had things like Bowman that you could turn to, but they decided to go with a very special set referred to as Tallboys. This was initially released in 64 and 65, mainly in 65 in football, and then there had been a couple of basketball sets. So it had existed for only 4 years. It existed first with a hockey set, then a football set, then 2 basketball sets. And so the combination of those 4 sets had this really almost an underground quality to it, where there were a lot of great rookies that people knew about, but the cards themselves, because they weren't prolific enough, they didn't have much of a presence in the market. So it was another one of those where people knew about it, but it didn't have a strong breadth. This meant that GameDay had the ability to communicate more directly to higher end collectors who really were interested in these older cards. And they wanted to make a card set that was kind of like the card set, the card that you get for each of the players. They wanted to make it a very high-end set, so they were catering to the high-end collectors with a high-end card cut. The actual dimensions of the card. The Tallboys are a normal width card, a little bit taller, about a third again as tall. That's the way that the cards are designed. Everybody knows it, but it's a little bit too tall for fitting into normal card pages and the like, and so you have to be a really specialized collector to really care about these cards and really understand them. And that's what GameDay wanted to do. They wanted to cater to people who weren't just looking for cards to throw into boxes and throw into binders. These were for people who really cared. And they figured that there was enough of a market that they could make a run at it. We'll see how well they do, but that was the concept they went with. The card design itself was a white border around the outside with a slightly inset picture. The background is black and white. The player himself is actually in color, so the player really stands out from the background. And then down at the bottom there's some text in various colors, but the problem is that the border is all white, and it limits the ability for the card to have its own distinctive quality, to really step out. What they were trying to do is make the player come out. and they succeeded at that, but they forgot to make the card stand out. Now the card back is following in the Pro Set tradition of having a whole bunch of stuff in there. I like the card back. I think it is really good. It uses the back area really well. It uses the real estate effectively, but it doesn't really have any distinctive qualities, anything that makes it stand out from everything else other than the card size. So it was an interesting design that they went with. The way that they released it was they started off with promos. And specifically, they began with a promo of draft players coming out. So this was a set of cards that looked at a couple of players who were going to be entering the draft. The draft hadn't happened yet, so it was a couple of players going to be in the draft, and they created versions of the card depending on which team that might draft them. So in Troy Vincent's case, you can see what his card would look like if he was with the Bengals, or the Green Bay Packers, or with the Indianapolis Colts. It was an interesting set. It was something Pro Set had already been doing, so it's not like it was a brand new idea, but it was an interesting way of starting to communicate with collectors who really cared. They then followed up with a set of cards that was released at the National. And these cards are exactly the same as the regular cards in the set. There's no difference between them, except on the back. In the regular set, it actually has a logo of the NFC or the AFC. Well, here they replaced that and they just put the 1992 National Atlanta logo there in place of it. So that's the difference, and then of course the card number is different. Otherwise, the cards were exactly the same. So these two promos are out there. They exist for this set, but the main set itself, when it was released, like I said, GameDay or NFL Properties, they really wanted these cards to be seen as truly high-end cards. So they began with a special box that actually had a slip cover. Now, slip covers are very unusual in cards, and I don't think it had ever been done before. Skybox would go on to use this for their own releases as well, but the idea that you would have a slip cover for a box just makes it look really formal. And then on the inside they had 4 images of cards, full size. There's nothing on the back, it's just the fronts, and every one of the boxes had Randall Cunningham because he was the official spokesman for the product. But the other 3 cards would change from box to box. I don't know how many combinations, but it made it kind of collectible in another way as well. And the fact that they had these large images right on the front, especially with the black back, that looked great. Also on the slipcover, they do have on the back a whole checklist as well. So right from the outset, when a card shop would get this box, it knew that this was special, and everybody in the card shop would know that the cards were something really at another level from basically everything else that they would encounter. So the cards themselves, as I talked about, that's basically the card design as I discussed it. They had no subsets. They did have some rookies, but the rookies weren't differentiated, but they did have 4-panel rookie cards that were intermixed, and it's the closest thing they got to a subset. But the problem they had was they had 500 cards in the set. And this was not a year that was good for rookies. This was one of the worst years for rookies, not in terms of the actual turnout across the entire draft. It's actually considered an unusually strong draft when you're looking at secondary players, but there were no stars. I mean, like no stars. In 1992, when these card sets came out, there was hardly anybody who was worthy of being chased. You'd have somebody like Tommy Vardell, who people would be kind of interested in, but nothing really carried. So that meant that with this set, you had to rely on the veterans, and the veterans were too spread out. Because there were no subsets, there were no secondary cards of players. They only had 1 card per player. And so they ran into the same problem that Upper Deck ran into in '89 and again in 1990, where because they didn't have much in terms of subsets, if any, most of the packs that you open don't have stars in it. When you're trying to sell expensive packs, a person's going to expect for that pack to have something of value to it. And if you open 2 or 3 packs and you don't get anybody, why in the world would you buy another pack? They also didn't even have inserts. So, I mean, this was about as stripped down as you could get, and they couldn't really make it work. Heading out of this year, they didn't really have much of an option, so they teamed up with Fleer. Fleer took over GameDay, and they started to make some interesting quirks. Right from the beginning, they released 2 sets. There was a promo set and there was a Game Breaker set. Now, I'll get to the Game Breaker set in a second, but the promo cards can really show you kind of what they were thinking. What they did was they took the same card front and they just put a color fade down at the bottom. On the card back, they made it everything, instead of horizontal, they made it vertical. And so did a better job of distributing out how the back would look and made the back look more interesting. Now, something that's interesting about this is the card front, like I said, it's the exact same card front from the previous year. They are using the new image and the new colors that they're going to use, but the card layout itself is the same as 1992. By the time 93 came around, they released the actual cards, they would actually change the border a little bit. So they would drop down the bottom portion of the border, get the image a little bit lower, and they would put the team name into the image. So the front actually changed a little bit and the back changed a little bit as well. So these 6 promo cards look almost identical to the main set, except the variations are slight, but the biggest thing you can tell is that in 92 they just said Game Day. In 93 they said Game Day 93. So even though these cards do have the color fade on the card front, which was indicative of 93, the card design itself is 92, which is kind of interesting. So that's what the promos are like. In the same way, the Game Breaker set did the exact same thing. The cards are done in exactly the same way. The numbers are obviously different, but down on the bottom of the card of the promo, it says promo. Well, with the Game Breakers, down at the bottom of the card, it says Game Breaker. So the numbers look very different from the main set, but again, the design, the actual design of the card front is the 92 card design with the color and the image of the 93 set. Now, GameDay liked to do sheets. They like to do promotional sheets. And so in 1992, they'd done a sheet with full-size images of the player, all slightly perforated. And so that was kind of something that you were going to see come up quite a bit. And Fleer loved to do that as well. And so in 93, they also did one not perforated, which is kind of a distinctive thing that you'll have to remember in a minute. But these sheets were actually common enough. They'd show up in magazines and the like, so you'll see them here and there. But they also, Fleer liked to do kind of cross-brand promotions, so they also did one where they had Fleer, Ultra, and GameDay all together on a much smaller sheet. So those things were kind of popping up. But there was a promotional release, which I'm going to talk about after I've talked about the 93 set, that is going to be very distinctive. So the 93 set was already very well promoted. Fleer had basically banked on this. They were in baseball starting to make their Flair set, which was going to be their third brand. In football, they were using GameDay as their third brand. So it was basically something that was already in place, and they were just going to be able to use it as their third brand. And they kind of scaled back the expectations from the 92 set. What GameDay originally had tried to do in 92, Fleer understood that that wasn't exactly what they needed to do. So they were trying to make something more accessible and to communicate more with kids. That was the right move that they made. The cards are, as I've said, they're slightly different from the 92 set, not much. The color fade's the big one. Obviously with the Cowboys it's a lot harder to see. But the vibrance of the colors, you can see with the other teams that these vibrant colors really read well. So it made the set a lot more fun. They made the set slightly shorter, not much. They had better rookies because it was 93. Again, they didn't differentiate the rookies, so there were no subsets in this at all. There were no sub-themes, nothing of that nature. It was just basically straightforward across the board, but the cards were not expecting to be as expensive, but they also had inserts, and that was really what made 93 work, truly work. The first insert set that they came up with was Game Breakers. Now, Game Breakers was a common name for Fleer. The 93 Game Breakers set, the insert set from the actual main set, uses the exact same card as the main set, except the border is all black. This is a high gloss card, all black border, and the text is all gold foil. That's very important. That's the key to the way that the actual Game Breakers work. The card back is very stripped down. It's very simplistic. But the reason that I'm making the big distinction is because the previous Game Breakers set that I talked about that was the promos, those Game Breakers are actually referred to as 92, 93, and they're a promo set. They're not an insert set. So there is a big distinction. Understand that the other one is really a 92 to 93. It's a transitional set. This is the actual insert set, the black border set. And the cards look magnificent because that deep, rich black, the high gloss black with the gold text, it really makes it look like a phenomenal card. I wish that they'd done something with the back, but they didn't need to. So it looked fantastic. They also made a rookie standout set because, again, it's Fleer. This is the kind of thing they did. And in this case, they replaced the black with a deep navy blue. Everything else about the card is the same. Absolutely everything is about the same. Even the back looks the same. They just replaced black with blue. And then for their second year stars, they replaced it with a deep forest green. So those are the three insert sets that they did for GameDay in 1993, and that was basically all they did for GameDay. They didn't push it too far. But like I alluded to, there was a promotional program that I need to talk about, and that was a deal that they made with McDonald's. So in promoting this, they wanted to really be able to have a good reach, and they reached out to McDonald's to put together a promotional crossover where McDonald's every once in a while likes to have these games that they do, promotional games, where you have little tear-offs on the cups and the fry containers, and you may get an instant win. But if you don't get an instant win, what is the additional? Monopoly is the most famous of these. This was one where when you didn't get an instant win, you got points, and you collected enough points, you could go up to the counter and you could get a sheet of cards. So just like the promo sheets, this is a promo sheet, but you could get one of 6 to 9 sheets. Basically, the way that it worked, these are all perforated, and they come in groups of 3. You would receive one of the 3, but they came in groups of 3. So this is from the All-Star team. It's basically all pro cards, and they had 18 cards across all the three sheets. So, and on the back, the sheets are numbered A, B, and C, and 1, 2, and 3. And then the cards on the back also have numbers. And this was a really interesting promotional program that they did, because that's the All-Star sheets. But they had a series of 3 sheets for every single team in the league, all 28. So there were 29 teams in essence that were available in McDonald's all over, and they were regional. So if you lived in, say, Miami, then you had the Miami Dolphins. You had all 3 of those sheets, and you had the All-Stars. If you were in Dallas, you had the Cowboys. You might have the Houston Oilers, probably not. If you were in New York City, you had the Jets and you had the Giants. If you were in, say, Salt Lake City, okay, well, how would Salt Lake City do it? Would they be catering to the Denver Broncos, Seattle Seahawks, maybe the San Francisco 49ers? So some places they had regional opportunities. They could kind of choose which team. I think the Cowboys were the most common to show up in regional locations that weren't attached to a city. The San Francisco 49ers were probably number 2 at that point. I don't know exactly how all that worked. But it gave you the ability to actually travel around the country, if you were traveling around, and collect different teams from different locations. So that regional quality was really kind of cool. And it was right there in McDonald's, so you were able to access them in a much more public way, which was a great promo that they did. And collecting them was a lot of fun because, again, you had 3 sheets per team, and then you had the All-Stars, so you at least had to be able to get 6 sheets wherever you were at, maybe 9. And if you were in a place that was kind of in between, you could travel a short distance and actually expand out your collection. My dad happened to be traveling a lot, and so he was collecting Miami, Seattle, Denver, LA Rams. I got all these sets together, which was really cool to get. And then it was decades later when I discovered that on eBay, you can actually go and buy a complete set of all of the teams, all 29 teams. So that was a really cool thing. It's 87 sheets in a box, and that's actually become kind of the common way that you find the 93 cards. People will tear these cards out of they're perforated, so they'll just take them out and then sell them individually. And they tend to show up for sale more often than the actual cards in the main set. I think that the sheets themselves are going to be more valuable, but that's the way people are doing it. But do understand that the images on the front are different. So this is not these are not the same cards as are in the set. The images do look different, numbers obviously are different. So it's basically a whole nother set. That promo was a really cool thing that they did, and it helped the 93 set really work. With 94, I don't know that anything really could have helped it. I wish that the set had continued, but 94 was its swan song. And they did the 94 set in the only way that made sense for 94, because everybody did the same thing in 94. They got rid of the border. This is not a full bleed. There's a small fade to white down at the bottom, but there's a band of color raised up a little bit with the player name. Otherwise, the image is spilling out off onto all sides. And fortunately, GameDay always chose good images. They did a good job in 92, they did a great job in 93, and in 94 they still were choosing good images. So it worked on this borderless card. These cards tend to look really great across the whole set. On the card back, they kind of gave up the ghost. It's kind of a mess on the card back. It's fine. It looks really nice. It's just you can't read anything, which is fine. By 94, they'd realized the card back doesn't really matter, so at least it does look good. But that was the set, and they still didn't differentiate the rookies. They still did not have any subsets, but in this year they did do a theme with the checklists. So they took the Reggie Brooks card and they used it as a ghosting behind the checklist on all the checklist cards. And so I like it when they do this because it makes the checklist cards a little bit more interesting. I just wish they didn't use the same image on every single card. But they were using Reggie Brooks because he was now their new mascot for their brand. And in fact, their promo card is the Reggie Brooks card with 000 on the back. So that was what they did in the set. But the insert sets were, it was the mid-90s for Fleer, and they were really kind of getting carried away, and unfortunately that very much happened with these inserts. The Game Breaker card is a big mess. It's a monochromatic image of a player with a smaller inset picture of the same picture of the player with a bunch of text over the bigger image, and it's a nice card. It's just a really boring card because you can't really see anything. Nothing is distinctive. The Rookie Sensations card, however, to me, this is the best insert of the entire set. It is a very formally created card. It is not a structured card. It's a fun, dynamic card, but it's embossed. And that's what really makes this stand out. Now, embossing is where you create a relief on the front so the player actually has three-dimensionality to it. Unfortunately, it means that on the back, you've pushed everything out. So you have the same imprint on the back, but the pattern on the back doesn't match what's on the front. So it looks a little weird, but it's a really nice card because it's well crafted, it's well thought out. So I really like that. The Second Year Stars is kind of a Photoshop mess. It's kind of a nightmare in a way. It does have the advantage of having a little bit more height, so you have more room for the background image to kind of carry in this case. If it was a regular Fleer card, it would look terrible. Here it doesn't look terrible, but it's not good. It's okay, it's passable. But the last set was Flashing Stars, and this insert set is a very dynamic insert set. Basically, there's an artistic rendering of kind of like space with some planets, with some deep, rich, bright colors. And I say bright because the tone of the color is bright. The actual brightness of the color is very toned down. But they used brushed metal over this card, and so with the brushed metal, it creates a little bit of liveliness that makes the card kind of interesting. I imagine for some people they consider this to be the best. I don't happen to, but it was the last insert set that they did, and it was the end of the story for the Game Days, unfortunately. This was a set that just didn't have longevity because Fleer couldn't quite figure out what to do with it. So that's basically it for Game Day. Unfortunately, they just couldn't keep it going. They had a great idea. They couldn't quite find the place in the market. But they were able to take advantage of using this as a chance to make it more common in the card industry to have full-size pages, or have the types of top loaders, or even the storage boxes that we needed for Tallboy cards. So that was a good element. And in basketball, they would make a jam session set that would actually carry for a couple more years. So they created a really good hole in the middle of the 90s where the Tallboy was able to once again exist and kind of thrive to a certain extent, a limited extent, but it is fun to look at that, to look at the baseball and the hockey sets that they tried. The basketball sets, I'm going to do a whole video on that. I'm also going to do one on the baseball and hockey sets. So if you get the chance to watch those, definitely check it out. Also, I've done a whole video on Tallboys themselves, but Game Day really brought Tallboys back to life and gave them a whole round life, which is good. So whether they were able to sustain or not, they were able to really kind of enrich the 90s and just make it a whole lot better. So that's basically what I've got. Like I said, check out the other videos that I've done. Subscribe if you haven't done so already. And thank you very much for watching.